Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute or so before we start. Okay, I think we'll start. Good evening, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to participants from other time zones. Welcome to our webinar, An Indian Perspective on Green Hydrogen. It's lovely to see such a great participation from across the globe for the webinar. Thank you very much for joining in. Hydrogen is currently the buzzword in the energy industry. Why so? Let's start by briefly understanding hydrogen, its use. Is it an energy source? Is it a carrier? And what are its utilization and production as it stands currently? Hydrogen is not found in the free form in nature, but must be liberated from molecules such as water or methane. It is therefore not an energy source and must be made using energy. It's already a significant chemical product. About half of annual pure hydrogen production is being used to make nitrogen fertilizers, and about 1/4 to convert low-grade crude oils into liquid transport fuels. The remaining quarter for other purposes. Like electricity, hydrogen is an energy carrier, but not a primary energy source. Now let's look at how hydrogen is utilized and produced currently. Most of the hydrogen produced across the globe today is through fossil fuels or natural gas. Hydrogen is produced on a commercial basis, largely as a feedstock in the chemical industry and in refineries, or as part of a mix of gases in steel production and in heat and power generation. It is used to produce ammonia, which is a feedstock for fertilizers, and this being majority of the current use. It's also used to produce other compounds such as methanol, synthetic fuels. It's also used as a reducing agents to replace coal and iron production. Therefore, the largest commercial utilization of hydrogen currently is in the hard to decarbonize sectors, such as fertilizers, steel, cement, chemicals, etc. What's India's perspective in the need for achieving a robust hydrogen economy? In continuation of the commitments by India in COP26 to achieve net zero by 2070, India is taking various steps to decarbonize. Central to this is the requirement for widespread adoption of renewable energy and vehicle electrification. To further complement these efforts, India is prioritizing green hydrogen as a potential solution to decarbonize hard to abate sectors, as mentioned above, refineries, ammonia, methanol, iron and steel, and even heavy duty trucking. As mentioned in the Niti Aayog report, India's distinct advantage in terms of low-cost renewable electricity, complemented by falling electrolyzer prices, can enable green hydrogen to be not just economical compared to fossil fuel-based hydrogen, but also compared to green hydrogen being produced across the globe. Currently, even in India, most of the hydrogen produced in the country comes from fossil fuels, but India is making and taking steps to replace it over time with green hydrogen. A very notable comment by Mr. Hemant Malia, who leads the Industrial Sustainability and Competitiveness team at the CEW, what he mentioned was that we need to create a market for green hydrogen. This time, we can't miss the boat like we did with the solar trajectory. Having said that, we'll have to see how users respond, because it's not just about supplying the fuel. End users need to be willing to invest as well to set up the adoption infrastructure. Therefore, consumer attitudes will inform us about how successful we would be. And this would largely depend on whether we can domestically build capacity or not. This is important to note, since we did face policy bottlenecks when it came to the full value chain of solar. As we all know, the current trade and political issues with China, which still provides bulk of the components fueling India's clean revolution on solar, is causing supply chain delays and worries. While it may be late to rectify some of these market trends for the solar sector, green hydrogen development is still in its infancy, and Indian policymakers intend to learn from the past mistakes and establish more robust supply chains. In the overall scheme of achieving net zero commitments, the use of low emission hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels lead to very modest reductions in CO2 emissions in the short term. That is by 2030, the targets that we are trying to achieve. I think green hydrogen itself may not be a large component of that. However, the contribution in the longer term with hydrogen, as hydrogen-based technologies mature, we believe that the contribution will be much, much larger. The contribution currently of hydrogen technologies is significantly lower than the contributions of other key mitigation measures, such as renewables, direct electrification, and behavioral change. Hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuel cells can play an important role in what we mention as hard to abate sectors, and where those other mitigation measures may not be available or would be difficult to implement. India's step towards creating a robust and self-sufficient ecosystem for production of green hydrogen has been the National Hydrogen Mission announced in 2021, followed by the very detailed report by NITI Aayog in 2022, and of course, the latest being the National Green Hydrogen Mission. The Green Hydrogen Mission plans a phase-wise approach, starting with creating demand while enabling adequate supply by increasing domestic electrolyzer manufacturing capacities. The Make in India initiatives with a bouquet of incentives at indigenization of the value chain will be a critical measure to achieve the targets under this phase. The most recent of this is news reports which have come out about the draft PLI schemes by the MNRE, which are contemplated in the generation and manufacturing sector. Beneficiaries are proposed to be selected through a competitive bidding process. Incentives could range anywhere from 30 kgs to 50 kgs over the life cycle. And bidding for these PLIs is likely to happen in 3 tranches, and we expect, or the expectation is that we should have some of these tenders coming out in June, July of this year. Before we proceed into the detailed webinar, a quick introduction to the firm and us. My name is Praveen Raju, and I'm one of the founding partners of Spiceroot Legal. Spiceroot Legal is a full-service law firm with specialized focus on certain sectors. One of the 3 sectors we focus on is alternative energy, sustainability, and mobility. Our work in this sector has grown tremendously over the last 3 to 4 years, and we've seen a paradigm shift in the approach in the energy sector on new technologies across the value chain, including manufacturing, generation, and storage. We work with some of the largest players in the industry across the value chain, right from OEMs to generation and storage companies. I lead the alternative energy and corporate M&A team with a specific focus on alternative energy and life sciences. I let my team, my members, my colleagues, Janvi and Swati, to introduce themselves. Over to you, Janvi.
Thank you, Praveen. Hi, everyone. Good evening. We're very excited to have you all here. I'm Janvi, a clean energy lawyer and senior associate Spiceroot Legal's alternative energy, sustainability, and mobility team. As Praveen mentioned, this team focuses on renewable and clean energy sources, knowing very well that this world needs to quickly move away from the conventional sources. While all the cutting edge work we do is interesting, it feels good to know that our clients are contributing to a better tomorrow, and we are in a way part of their efforts. Swati, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Swati Narayanan, an associate at Spiceroot Legal, specializing in alternate energy, sustainability, and e-mobility. It's been amazing being a part of this team for the last 2 years, where I have immense opportunity to learn about the energy sector and also work on exciting projects related to electric vehicles, battery swapping, hydrogen projects, and more. Thank you all for taking the time for joining us as we share our thoughts and also share some interesting tidbits on on the green hydrogen sector. Praveen, over to you to maybe set the tone for this webinar.
Thank you, Janvi. Thank you, Swati. While I lead the alternative energy practice, I must say that it's Janvi and Swati who are the experts on this and who probably live and breathe hydrogen. While there is much to discuss about hydrogen, because of the limited time, what we'll cover today is one, large level regulatory framework, various stakeholders who are important in building a successful hydrogen economy, insights from other countries, and our views and recommendations on challenges and steps to be implemented. We'll take a short pause in between to take up any questions. Please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box. We'll also take questions at the end of the webinar. I will now hand it over to Janvi and Swati. Janvi, could you start off by giving us a brief on the evolution and current regulatory framework in India for green hydrogen and how you believe that is shaping the future for green hydrogen in India?
Sure, thank you. So India's made all the noise around green hydrogen in the past couple of years. And in terms of policies and commitments, it really began with the Prime Minister launching the National Hydrogen Mission on India's 75th Independence Day with an aim of making India the hub of green hydrogen in terms of two capabilities, production and export. Every action taken by the government and Ministry of Power after this really emanates and flows from the launch of this mission, and we'll see how. At a global commitment level, the Prime Minister announced a 5-part action plan at the 26th Conference of Parties held at UK in November 2021. The intent then was very clear: to reduce total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from the date of COP26 to 2030 and to achieve net zero emissions by 2070. Then on 17th Feb 2022, the Ministry of Power launched the Green Hydrogen Policy, and this policy defines what is green hydrogen and green ammonia. The definition goes like this: it's the hydrogen and ammonia produced by way of electrolysis of water using renewable energy. This clarity of what constitutes green hydrogen, I believe, comes as a relief, although I think Swati may disagree with us and have thoughts around how this definition needs to be more specific, and we'll get to that in the course of this webinar. Now, this policy addressed a bunch of incentives for the manufacturers of green hydrogen, largely around the flexibility of procuring renewable energy and ease of process involved here. What are some of these incentives? I think to begin with, I'd like to mention the waiver of interstate transmission charges that will be granted for a period of 25 years to the producer of green hydrogen and green ammonia from the projects commissioned before 30th June 2025. An amendment to this effect was introduced by the Ministry of Power in the 2023 memorandum. Open access has been granted to renewable energy from either from a co-located renewable energy plant or sourced from a remotely located renewable energy plant. The connectivity for interstate transmission system will be granted on priority under the electricity rules. There are certain policies around how land in renewable energy parks can be allotted for the manufacture of green hydrogen and green ammonia. Renewable energy consumed for the production of green hydrogen will be counted towards the renewable purchase obligation compliance of the consuming entity. It also talks about allowing distribution licensees to procure and supply renewable energy to the manufacturer of green hydrogen at nominal costs. All in all, also a very important positive that comes out of this is the setup of a single portal for all statutory clearances and permissions required for manufacture, transportation, storage, and distribution of green hydrogen. A very noteworthy move was also the release of Niti Aayog report, which was titled Harnessing Green Hydrogen, Opportunities for Deep Decarbonization in India, which was released on 29th June 2022. The report covers various aspects of the green hydrogen ecosystem, such as production methods, potential applications in various sectors, regulatory and funding framework necessary for the development of this market, importance of international collaboration, and also lays down a national action plan on green hydrogen. I think this is a fabulous report, and anyone interested in understanding how the green hydrogen economy is going to shape up should give this a read. Now, what this report also did is identify the areas that need attention to enable transition to a green hydrogen economy. I'll address the most important one, that is reducing the cost of green hydrogen. There is no denying that this is the most challenging issue to tackle. The cost of green hydrogen is largely determined by the cost of electrolyzers, which is the technology that performs electrolysis process, and electricity. And there are other incidental costs, such as the cost of operations, transmission, distribution, and other local taxes. Currently, the cost of hydrogen through electrolysis is around $4 to $7 per kg, making it difficult to compete with gray or brown hydrogen, for example, which is priced anywhere between $0.9 to $2.3 per kg. The other challenge with green hydrogen is the storage issue. This becomes challenging because as a characteristic, it has low density. So then it requires pressurization or liquefaction for the storage, or conversion to compounds like ammonia raises the energy conversion costs. Another issue coupled with the problem of storage is the issue of transportation. And while right now it may seem like pipelines is your most obvious answer and the most cost-effective method for transporting hydrogen, I believe this will be more feasible and may make more sense once the demand of green hydrogen exceeds tens of tons per day. So what is it that needs to be done in the near term? I think an assessment needs to be made on the viability and upgradation of the existing natural gas pipelines for the transportation of hydrogen. It also makes sense to address all of these pain points once there is a strong market demand for green hydrogen. And from what we've seen in the report and the policy, this can be achieved by targeted gap funding, similar to some of the schemes that were released for solar financing, mandate-driven approaches for setting targets such as blending hydrogen with natural gas, and identifying suitable industrial clusters so that a focused approach is given. It also goes without saying that identifying and creating the right market will develop manufacturing and export opportunities. And we will see green hydrogen as a tradable commodity. India's internal market for electrolyzers has been estimated to be worth around $31 billion by 2050. Also, long-standing importers of hydrogen, such as Japan and South Korea, are willing to pay a premium price for imported hydrogen. So India as a market needs to realize the importance of green hydrogen as a commodity from a domestic manufacturing and export opportunity perspective. The report also provides several recommendations to make India a global hub of green hydrogen, and a few crucial ones that are listed in the report are investing in R&D, providing investment facilitation measures, encouraging state-level policies, initiating rapid skill development programs, and setting up an interdisciplinary project management unit. Now, the latest and the most important move was the approval of National Green Hydrogen Mission by the Union Cabinet earlier this year, with an initial outlay of 19,744 crores. Swati, can you please take us through the most important aspects of this mission and how it plans to implement the objectives laid out here?
So just before Swati, starts, I think one notable thing that we should probably kind of keep in mind is that while the policy, etc., largely kind of looks at domestic consumption, I think that there is hope and belief that if we are able to become create the right technologies and create enough domestic capacity, the ability to export is also available. In fact, I was listening to another podcast recently, which was talking about countries which are just purely concentrating on export. For example, countries like Chile, which are producing hydrogen not for the purposes of domestic consumption and just purely looking at export. And I think that that's a large play as well. But probably after we get to a stage where we are able to meet our domestic demands. Sorry, Swati, carry on.
Thanks, Praveen. Thanks, Janvi. So Janvi briefly touched upon the regulatory framework governing green hydrogen, sharing interesting insights about the NITI Aayog report, its features, and also provided a brief introduction about the mission. Now let's dive into the main components and what the mission outcomes are, which has sparked quite curiosity and generated a lot of buzz amongst us energy enthusiasts. So looking at the mission, we can very clearly identify that it has laid down a concrete structure for investment, growth, and development of green hydrogen in India. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy will lead this mission, aiming to develop a fully functional green hydrogen ecosystem and also help India achieve its climate goal objectives. In order to achieve these goals, the mission has laid down various components. The three most important ones that we will today look at are the SITE program, the pilot projects, and the R&D programs. So the SITE program, also known as the Strategic Intervention for Green Hydrogen Transition, it aims to provide both financial as well as non-financial incentives to domestic manufacturers. These investments, once rolled out, would encourage production of low-cost hydrogen equipment and technology. As Praveen had briefly touched upon during the introduction, the mission also envisages rolling out PLI scheme in order to aid in the production and manufacturing of green hydrogen. The government, through this PLI scheme, aims to provide incentives of around 13,000 crores, which will be spread over a period of 3 years. The basic aim is to boost indigenous production of green hydrogen to around 3.6 million metric tons. Beneficiaries, particularly the domestic manufacturers under the scheme, will be selected through a competitive bidding process. The incentives will start from anywhere at a cap of rupees 50 per kilogram of hydrogen. And by the end of 3 years, it would be capped at rupees 30 for per kilogram of hydrogen. I think this is a very interesting scheme that the government is planning to launch, and all domestic manufacturers should keep an eye out for. Moving on to pilot projects, the government has a very clear vision to establish pilot initiatives in sectors like steel, heavy-duty mobility, shipping, and more to support large-scale production and use of hydrogen. These pilot projects will be diversified across technology option in order to ensure capacity building and experience across the entire energy hydrogen value chain. Now, looking at the research and development projects, right? The mission has also placed significant amount of emphasis on the importance of innovation in order to drive down costs associated with production, storage, transportation, and utilization. To foster innovation, a dedicated research and development program will be implemented in collaboration with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. A key partnership that the mission aims to set up is the Strategic Hydrogen Innovation Partnership for research and development initiatives to create a globally competitive technology. Now, as Praveen briefly touched upon, the phase in which the mission will be implemented. So the mission has been approached to be implemented in a dual phase manner. Let's take a closer look at each of these phases. The phase 1 spans from around 2022-23 to end of the year 2025-26, which has 4 basic aims. First, to boost domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers. Second, to encourage the research and development efforts. Third, to initiate pilot projects in key sectors like green steel production, heavy-duty transportation. And lastly, to establish a concrete legislative and policy framework. Moving on to phase 2, covering from the period of 2026-27 to end of 2029-30. In addition to scaling up hydrogen production and undertaking pilot project, the mission also aims to dedicate resources for R&D activities in sectors like railway and aviation. Having discussed the mission overview and the process of implementation, it is important to understand what is the end goal that the mission is aiming to strive for. So looking at the mission outcome, we see that by 2030, the mission aims to build capabilities to produce at least 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen annually. This would have a significantly reduce the carbon emission and also promote the use of clean and sustainable energy sources. Further, the mission also strives to add approximately 125 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity to create a strong foundation for production and also help in generation of employment opportunity. To support these goals, the mission aims to attract investments of around INR 8 lakh crores, facilitating the development of infrastructure, manufacturing facilities, and research and development activities. So overall, we can see that the mission stands as our testament to our unwavering commitment towards establishing a sustainable and a low carbon energy ecosystem, focusing on economic development, job creation, and environment sustainability. So we'll just take a pause for around 1 minute here in case anyone has any questions regarding the existing regulatory framework or the mission, and post that we can continue with the second half of our webinar.
Yes, I mean, it's just a quick 10-minute pause if anybody has any specific questions. I think that I got one question from Anne, but that's on podcast recommendations. Surely, Anne, we'll get that across to you. Okay.
All right. So in addition to understanding the regulatory framework governing green hydrogen, I think it's also important to understand how these policies would directly affect various stakeholders who are involved in this process. Janvi, could you please step in and maybe share some of your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you. So given the stage this green hydrogen industry is at, we've tried to analyze what the interested stakeholders have to look forward for. Let's start from who these stakeholders are. One, government, through their legislative and various policy incentive support, they have a very pivotal role to play in a successful transition to a green hydrogen economy. We'll come to what these policy and incentive support needs to look like and what it needs to include. Energy companies such as Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, Hindustan Petroleum are actively exploring the production and distribution of hydrogen in the country. And renewable companies like Renew Power, Adani, Greenco are leveraging their expertise in renewable energy sources like solar and wind to produce green hydrogen in a sustainable manner. Now, one very interesting chat I was a part of when I attended the India Energy Week earlier this year in Bangalore was how these energy companies really look forward to depend on renewable sources such as green hydrogen to back up their power system. But if manufacturing of green hydrogen requires replacement of the entire existing system, that would be very cost heavy. So what could be one of the ways this could be tackled? And a prompt from the audience was that if technology companies like say PM electrolyzer manufacturing entities are able to come up with software and technologies that are able to be plugged into the energy company's existing power system, it will help us smooth transition into renewable sources and will be easy on the pocket for these companies. This is where I bring the third stakeholder that is interested in the entire ecosystem, which is a technology provider. Now, the growth and advancement of the green hydrogen industry depends on the expertise and innovative technologies offered by these technology providers. Companies like Nel Hydrogen, ITM Power, with their cutting-edge technologies and extensive experience, are among those that offer solution for green hydrogen production, including electrolyzers, PM, non-PM technology, and fuel cells. The other important collaborators include research institutions and industry associations. Premium research institutions in India, including the Indian Institute of Science, IIS, and Indian Institute of Technology, are conducting research on green hydrogen production and exploring its potential application in various sectors so that a widespread adoption could be appreciated by the market. Also, the industry associations are collaborating with stakeholders from various sectors and facilitating the exchange of knowledge and best practices to accelerate the growth of green hydrogen in India. So all in all, I think there's some very exciting news for all these stakeholders in terms of what's coming next and the advantages they can avail. So what are these exciting expectations that stakeholders can look forward for? As Praveen and Swati briefly discussed, this PLI scheme will provide incentives to eligible manufacturers. Now, what these incentives are going to be have not been spelled out yet, but we do know that it will extend financial support to manufacturers based on their incremental sales. It will provide capital subsidies for support like infra and tech. It will extend interest subvention for low-cost funding and R&D support. The support offered through these PLI schemes differ across sectors from our experience of working with clients on the PLI schemes when, say, an OEM participates in one of those schemes. And these schemes are also reviewed periodically by the government to align the changing requirements of the sector. So it's a wait and watch game for what the green hydrogen manufacturing entity PLI scheme looks like. Now, the second important advantage that the stakeholders can avail are the tax and other financial incentives. The Ministry of Power has recommended a uniform slab of 5% GST on all renewable energy components nationwide, which will help reduce the cost of companies involved in production of green hydrogen. Also, as of last week, a new report titled Low Cost Energy Transition Finance was released in collaboration with International Renewable Energy Agency and India's MNRE. It spoke about private sector engagement, importance of historical cost reduction trends, and the paramount importance of stable policies and transparency in attracting investments. From a lending perspective, banks have proposed that loan towards electric vehicles and green hydrogen can be classified under the priority sector lending, which can help bridge this financing gap in the sectors. At a global partnership level, India has established strategic partnerships with other countries to promote the development of the green hydrogen industry. Let's take an example. India and France will facilitate cooperation between the relevant research institutions, including visa issuance for researchers. Another interesting collaboration that is with Panama is the Panama Canal is a critical factor in their aspirations to leverage green hydrogen production, as around 29% of the ships that transit through the Panama Canal are powered by diesel. And this has encouraged Panama to take keen participation in the transition to green energy. Now, when we all sat down to discuss the structure for the webinar, one important question that we wanted to address was, what will a law do in this space? Sure, as lawyers, we would love to play with one more legislative piece. But why do all these stakeholders that we mentioned need a law on hydrogen? That brings us to the next part of this webinar, the need for a legal framework. Now, currently, India regulates hydrogen use through policies. But what should the ideal framework that should be in place to tackle the mighty development of green hydrogen economy that is to come? Let's take an existing element like R&D, for example. While R&D projects, if you recollect, on hydrogen started very early on in India, but due to lackluster response and early adoption by the industries, coupled with an effective implementation of policies, we're still at a nascent stage in comparison to the other countries in the world. So here we think a dedicated legislation that provides clear guidelines and promotes the development, deployment, use, transportation, distribution of hydrogen is required to fill in the loopholes created by these policies. Let's also take South Korea as an example to see and understand what regulations can address. The Hydrogen Economy Promotion and Safety Management Act in South Korea was enacted in 2020, and it created Hydrogen Economy Council. This council devises strategies and policies at a national level in South Korea. The act specifies procedure for hydrogen refueling station, fuel cell installations, And most importantly, it establishes safety standards in areas such as hydrogen-related business permits, manufacturing facilities, product inspections, and maintenance inspections of hydrogen-powered facilities. Currently, there are no specific laws that address renewable energy in India. Since renewable energy is part of the electricity sector, it is governed under the provisions of Electricity Act and the rules and regulations issued under it. Even if you look at the evolution of Electricity Act, it's very interesting. When liberalizing electricity sector and the generation, transmission, distribution, trade, and use of electricity became inevitable, India's requirement at that time was to add about 100 gigawatt of electric capacity back in 2012, and by 2012. And there was a need to create an environment for attracting such investment. And today we can safely say that this specific legislation of Electricity Act did all this and more for the electric sector. So in our analysis, we were able to identify that a dedicated regulatory framework is necessary for one, providing certainty to the investors seeking to establish huge green hydrogen projects in India. If India continues to regulate hydrogen across different legislations, this patchwork inevitably will delay the necessary energy transition and can lead to fragmentation, overlapping, and I guess sometimes contradictory legislation and uncertainty for the investors. It is also important to set industry standards for safety and quality purposes. It could be applicable for the manufacturers of electrolyzers and other technologies, balance of plant, EPC contractor working on a hydrogen project, and the generation and project developers themselves. Also, to meet the objectives laid out in National Hydrogen Mission, India needs to remove these barriers for letting in investment specific to hydrogen, create a level playing field with other net zero technologies, and promote a harmonized approach to hydrogen. And we believe a specific legislative piece where green hydrogen roadmap, generation, distribution, licensing, infrastructure, safety standards, financial incentives, in fact, like subsidies and tax benefits, exemptions, topics like hydrogen refueling station, fuel cell installations, can be addressed through the use of this specific legislative piece. We have also analyzed the existing legal framework in other leading nations, such as US, China, and European Union, to understand their journey in hydrogen and to really understand what India can learn from them. Swati, in your analysis, what have you observed for these three countries, and what do you think India has to pick from their journey?
Thanks, Janvi. So presently, India has only recently joined the ranks of green hydrogen leaders, like you mentioned, the United States of America, China, and the European Union by launching the National Hydrogen Mission. As India is trying to establish and create its place in this domain, there are four main sectors that I think India needs to focus more on, which would be having a concrete legal framework, ensuring that there are adequate subsidies in place, coming out and rolling out with policy measures, and ensuring that there is sufficient collaboration in order to further strengthen its position. Let's take a look at United States and see what they have done till date. So while there are no specific laws on hydrogen energy which are yet introduced, the US government has allocated sufficient amount of funds under the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill. As a part of the bill, the Department of Energy was directed to establish two drafts. One was on the Clean Hydrogen Production Standards, or CHPS, and the other, which is the Clean Hydrogen Strategy and Roadmap. The CHPS aims to support clean hydrogen production from diverse energy sources and clearly outlines what would amount as clean hydrogen. On the other hand, the roadmap provides a clear action plan in order to achieve these goals which are set under these standards. In addition to this, the US Congress has also passed the Inflation Reduction Act. The act combines a wide array of clean energy tax incentives into one single bill. The IRA offers two types of credits. We have the investment tax credit, which provides up to 30% for clean hydrogen project based on the emission intensity, and the production tax credit up to a massive $3 per kilogram of hydrogen for the least emission intensive product. These measures will increase the production level to around 30 million metric tons per annum by the end of 2030-35, setting a great example for other countries to follow. On the policy front, the Department of Energy has also introduced the Energy Earthshot Initiative on June 7, 2021. Through this initiative, they are funding around 31 projects with the goal of reducing the cost of green hydrogen by 80% to around $1 for per kilogram of hydrogen in the coming decade. Now, let's look at what China has been doing till date, right? Similar to the United States, China has also not implemented any kind of specific laws or regulations for hydrogen energy. However, it has shown a very strong policy support and industrial initiative by releasing the first national level medium and long-term plan for the development of hydrogen energy industry. The main focus that the plan focuses on is storage, transportation, and diversifying the end use of hydrogen. Further, to encourage more private and public collaboration, the China Energy Corporation, along with 18 other sponsors, have launched the China Hydrogen Alliance on February 2018. The main objective is to accelerate the research and development, deployment of hydrogen technology, as well as to promote international cooperation in this field. So while looking at hydrogen in China, when we compare it with solar, right? Like while China's solar industry enjoyed years of generous subsidies from the central government, which helped the equipment makers dominate the global supply chain, similar to what was prevalent in India, hydrogen is yet to see the same level of policy support in terms of subsidies. However, I do believe that the domestic manufacturers should keep an eye out for the kinds of subsidies that China may, plan to roll out. Let's look at what European Union have been doing before we come and sum up of what India can learn from all these three countries. The European Commission has adopted two delegated acts on February 13, 2023. These acts basically define the criteria for renewable hydrogen and also establish conditions for hydrogen to be considered as a renewable fuel. Like Janvi had mentioned earlier today, green hydrogen, though, has been really well defined under our hydrogen policy, that is, hydrogen produced through renewable energy. It is also important to look and understand from where these renewable energy sources will be used. Say, for example, if the renewable energy for generation of green hydrogen is being considered from the existing renewable source capacity, then it will add additional stress on the existing infrastructure, which have been set up for dedicated projects already in progress. So then the domestic manufacturers will have to rely on fossil fuel-based power generation for generating green hydrogen. Thus, it's very important that while defining green hydrogen and its use, it is important to consider the additional capacity of green hydrogen that needs to be added in order to relieve the stress on the existing source of capacity. And we can see that EU has taken a step forward by, very well bringing in the principles of additionality within these two delegated acts and setting the tone for how a green energy or green hydrogen should be developed. In addition to this, on the policy front, we see that initiatives like the Clean Hydrogen Alliance and the Clean Hydrogen Partnership helps facilitating collaboration and deployment of hydrogen technology. EU has also launched the Hydrogen Public Funding Compass, which serves as a guide for stakeholders to identify public funding sources for these hydrogen projects. It's designed as a single entry point for stakeholders to access information on the most important public funding programs and funds which are available for renewable and low carbon hydrogen. Now, Coming to India, we see that despite various announcements by both private and public sector companies regarding green hydrogen plants, there has been a steady growth in the development and manufacturing of green hydrogen. But for India to accelerate in this, it needs to act swiftly and leverage its advantage in low-cost renewable energy production. As Janvi mentioned earlier, a strong legal framework similar to the one existing in EU would help India meet the stringent environment standards and also encourage domestic manufacturers to rely more on renewable sources rather than fossil fuel-based power generation. Further, India can also draw inspiration from funding support initiatives like the US and the EU. Programs like the US Energy Earthshot initiatives and the EU's Hydrogen Public Funding Compass will help create a thriving ecosystem for public and private stakeholders. Currently, if we look at the subsidies in place, based on the PLI scheme, India is planning to provide a subsidy of around 30 rupees per kilogram of hydrogen. However, in comparison to US under its production tax credit, it's providing incentives of almost $3 per kilogram of hydrogen. So when we look at this comparison, we can see that the subsidy provided in US is almost 88% higher than what's being provided in India. Now, while these subsidies are very helpful for attracting domestic manufacturers, it is also important that while India is rolling these out, it needs to take into consideration how the international investors will maybe want to take a look at this, as the lower subsidies would maybe entail that, they would prefer to invest more in US and EU for a better and a higher rate of return. So this is something that maybe India can take a look at before it rolls out these subsidies by the end of June, July. So in order to sum up, I believe that by adopting these measures, India will really help pave its way in achieving the hydrogen goals and also contributing to a sustainable and a low carbon future. While we have understood what India needs and what measures it needs to take, we have also in our analysis tried to identify what are a few challenges that the stakeholders might face while undertaking various projects on green hydrogen. Janvi, could you maybe step in and tell us what are some of these challenges and how do you think that the stakeholders should deal with them?
Sure. Thank you, Swati. I'm sure that a market as dynamic as green hydrogen, it will face challenges in the times to come. And from what we've seen, read, and understood about this ecosystem so far, we've identified a few challenges and the probable solutions to make this mission a success. Like I've addressed the first point in every part of the webinar, I'm going to again pick up the cost-intensive production of green hydrogen. This calls for massive government support to promote cost-effective electrolyzer manufacturing in terms of financial incentives like availability of low-cost funding, providing subsidies, tax benefits, etc. What may also help is spelling out the mode, extent, and time spread of incentive payment to help spur near-term investment in this space. Also, I think for time-bound capacity addition, which is because India is committed to the net zero emissions in the future, the incentives can be linked to construction, commissioning, or production timelines. The problem here that we've seen is in the current GST structure, which levies a high 18% tax on inorganic chemicals used in the production of green hydrogen. This substantially increases the overall costs associated with green hydrogen production. And as a result, it becomes less competitive compared to other energy sources that enjoy lower GST rates. And so when the Ministry of Power or MNRE starts to address incentives for manufacturers, this may be one of the first things they pick up. The other challenge that we've seen is the lack of technical expertise in electrolyzer manufacturing. Like we've said, the electrolyzer manufacturing is at a nascent stage in India, and awareness around the technical specifications or say functionalities is lacking. I'll take this example, which is while working on a few tenders for our clients, we realized that the way the tender was structured, it was far away from how an electrolyzer functions and its specifications are structured. In some cases, it was at par with like a solar panel or any other electric equipment that an OEM may supply. What uh, what industry associations or industry people have failed to understand so far is that an electrolyzer is very heavily driven by IP, and protection of IP is at the core of an OEM manufacturer's concern when they supply this to a purchaser. Now, the recommendation for this is that, of course, there's investment in training and education programs to help workers equip themselves with what is the structure of an electrolyzer and how this works in the long term. But all the stakeholders must also realize the difference and the sophistication of a PM or a non-PM technology in electrolyzer. The third challenge that may come about is the availability of water. As per reports, to produce 1 kg of hydrogen, 9 kg of water is needed. And so for a large scale electrolyzer producing 0.15 million tons of hydrogen, around 3 million tons of water would be required. Now, of course, desalinization is a viable option, but it can also produce harmful waste products such as brine that contain toxins like chlorine and copper. Desalinization as a process also consumes significant amount of energy. The recommendation here is that India should engage in R&D to overcome negative outputs of desalinization as a process and to make it more energy efficient. To ensure that green hydrogen can serve as a workable replacement for conventional fossil fuels, there is a need to enhance distribution and storage capabilities. So far, we've discussed the points from a manufacturer or an OEM or a technology provider perspective. But what's also really important to address is how this has been addressed or looked at from the eyes of a consumer or a developer, project developer who will be using and consuming green hydrogen. And the first issue that will come along with cost is the storage and transportation problem. The mode of export will go on to define the choice of infrastructure and then significantly influence the costs associated with it. Liquefaction, like we discussed, is an energy consuming process. Even derivatives like ammonia require liquefaction, and that increases the cost associated with it. The recommendation here is that government should work with stakeholders to develop a roadmap for development of infra such as pipelines, storage facilities, and refueling stations. Like I briefly discussed earlier, there will come a time where there'll be a need to lay down pipelines for this. But at the moment, how much of the existing natural gas pipeline can be used for transportation of hydrogen needs to be assessed as a viable option. Now, the crux and the core of the entire webinar was also around how designing enabling policies and regulatory framework will go a long way in addressing these challenges. There is a need to design these policies that oversee adherence and compliance with these regulations. And I think a dedicated framework will help instill confidence in investors, public, and other stakeholders to create a conducive environment for the industry's growth and development. There is no denying that the story so far looks promising, and I hope all of you feel the same way. We'll also just quickly look at the market players in the green hydrogen energy space currently. We have Adani, who's announced in June 2022 that it has partnered with France's Total Energy to invest around $50 billion over the next 10 years in India for the production of green hydrogen. Reliance, as we all know, has great plans around green hydrogen, and they are a heavy user and manufacturer of grey hydrogen at the moment, but they plan to swiftly transition to green hydrogen by the end of 2025. They've also worked with Ashok Leyland to unveil India's first heavy-duty truck with hydrogen ICE, and this was unveiled, in fact, at the India Energy Week, which I happened to witness. Indian Oil Corporation aims to replace around 10% of the present fossil fuel-based hydrogen at its refineries with green hydrogen. And its subsidiaries has also released a recent announcement for design, manufacture, and commissioning of electrolyzer and associate components for production of green hydrogen in Chennai. There are other players like ONGC, Greenco, GAIL, Bharat Petroleum who've come up with exciting announcements around this. a bunch of OEMs who provide electrolyzer technology are also existing in the market, and you can see a few of them here. We have Plug Power, Ohmium, Octopus, Nel, Fuel Cell, Bloom Energy, etc. This brings us to the end of our discussion points on the webinar. Praveen, would you please provide a few concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you. I think we've gotten a few questions as well, and we'll address those questions. But just, the overall, what we believe and what we see in the hydrogen market in India and how we perceive it as in comparison to what was, what was done during, for solar or for wind. We believe that the right initial steps have been taken. I think that the hydrogen mission and the steps towards, the hydrogen mission itself is a great step in kind of moving and kind of engaging the right stakeholders to start implementation of hydrogen and start looking at hydrogen as as an energy carrier for the future. But if you look at if you look at the hydrogen mission, I think that under phase 1, there are 4 aspects that are intended to be covered. The first one, of course, and I think that of all of these, I think that it isn't as fast as it should be. And I think that, again, we shouldn't go down the path where we miss the bus and we have to act quickly. And I'm hoping that the government and the policymakers are going to kind of take steps quick enough to kind of address those issues. We've already seen a lot of private participants entering this domain and doing the right things that need to be done. And when it comes to, I think, at least when it comes to encouraging pilot projects, I think that is one part of phase 1, which we see a lot of activity, not just from the private sector side, but also from the public sector side, because we've seen a lot of tenders coming out, being floated by various PSUs in the recent few months, where they are either setting up hydrogen plants for captive consumption or for the distribution to other consumers, to end consumers. All in all, good steps, and we see a promising future for hydrogen in India. But like I said, I think that we shouldn't get bottlenecked, or we shouldn't. It has to move at a pace to ensure that we are competing with the world on hydrogen. So that ends our webinar. I think there are a couple of questions which came in. We'll take those questions up. I think there are a couple of questions from Kinjal Salvi. I think one was on Janvi. Swati, please step in if you'd like to kind of add to what I have to say, or
Sure.
correct me if I'm wrong. Apart from electrolyzer, are there any other methods covered? What about generating hydrogen from municipal solid waste? If I'm not mistaken, I think the National Hydrogen Mission has largely concentrated on electrolyzer manufacturing, electrolyzer-linked manufacturing of hydrogen. There is vague, and I think there are 1 or 2 mentions of hydrogen being manufactured through bio-waste, etc. But I don't think that the impetus has kind of, there hasn't been a large enough impetus on that front. But I think at the private level, the question that arises is, of course, I think that even in the Niti Aayog report, I think that there was a mention that there should be the policy initiatives which are being undertaken under the National Hydrogen Mission in Green Hydrogen Mission in relation to green hydrogen should also extend to other forms of green hydrogen. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. What are the kind of incentives that would flow specifically in relation to forms of generation of hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is not only through electrolysis. So we'll have to still wait and watch. But yes, Kinjal, I think that's a good question. I think that we should, because in fact, one of the discussions that I was having with our client in relation to the amount of waste, I mean, just merely because of the population that we have, the ability to convert that into biogas and into hydrogen or other forms of energy is something which is tremendous. The potential is tremendous. Kinjal,
and if I can just step in, also to address Kinjal's question, of course, there are, like the definition of green hydrogen or the policy incentives for manufacturers largely revolve around production of green hydrogen through renewable energy, and so how easily that can be accessed. So yes, there is that focus on electrolysis as a process, but I think that what the government has done, and it's a great move, is to collect R&D efforts towards generation of hydrogen through municipal solid waste and biogas and all of that, right? So at least at this stage, while the other area of green hydrogen develops in the years to come, R&D efforts from the government side have been focused upon. And so we'll wait and see how that develops. And this has found its mention in the report, if I'm not mistaken, the Niti Aayog report.
And I think that if I'm not mistaken, I think that there are already municipal corporations which are working with private agencies to kind of develop hydrogen through such through waste, right? So I think those initiatives are already already being undertaken at some level, may not be at the scale that we see at the electrolyzer for electrolyzers, but we do see a lot of activity happening there. I think Kinjal had another question. I'll address both of Kinjal's questions first. When you mention India is to release subsidies, where can we keep a watch on these? What ministries, MNRE, PAR, or is there any other such platform? I would presume that it's going to be MNRE and the PAR ministry.
Ministry of PAR. Yeah.
Ministry of PAR. It should largely emanate out of there, and from there it would flow into other regulatory bodies or other agencies, but it will flow from there. Sometimes we also tend to kind of, for example, all of the news reports on the latest PLI schemes, which is being rolled out, which is intended to be rolled out. There is a news report which says that the draft PLI schemes are in place, but the draft PLI schemes are not available anywhere, right? So we've also not been able to kind of get those draft PLI schemes, but there are news reports about PLI schemes and some journalists having got access to that draft PLI schemes. The next question, I think, Anne Camoso from, hi Anne, I hope you're doing well. Anne has asked us two questions. One is, are fossil fuel companies generally embracing green hydrogen by participating in development programs? If not, do you see their resistance slowing down the program's progress at all? Janvi, you want to take this, or Swati, you want to?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks, Anne, for the question. I think the involvement of fossil fuel companies in the green hydrogen story and development really varies. We have seen like big companies like Indian Oil, NTPC, GAIL, Bharat Petroleum really look forward for replacing their energy sources with green hydrogen, but the development has not been substantial so far. And from what I believe, looking at the market factors, what may be holding them back is, benchmarking standards, quality standards, the quantity, in fact, that, an electrolyzer can generate, as opposed to their existing sources, right? So when they get the comfort that this is an adequate replacement for their existing source of energy is when there will be 100% adoption and acceptance of this. But given the stage, and not many incentives are also in place at the moment, there are expected policies to be rolled out. With that kind of background, we have seen a lot of companies at least start their pilot projects, like Praveen mentioned, initiate R&D efforts for that matter, commit to adoption of green hydrogen by a certain, within a few years. So those kind of commitments and those kind of policy initiatives have been taken by these fossil fuel companies. And in fact, it's not slowing down the program's progress at all. If anything, it's putting that kind of pressure on the ministries and the regulatory bodies to come up with more supportive, initiatives and policies for the players. That's our thought on this.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think that we see an adaptation happening, and I think that it's across both the private as well as the public sector units, large fossil fuel players in the country. So that's a good sign. I think Anne had one more question, which was, if a large federal legislative effort for hydrogen is undertaken, do you anticipate much state level legislation too? Unfortunately, so we are a federal, similar to the US. So there are aspects which are governed at the central level. There are aspects which are governed, which both the central as well as the state can legislate, and there are aspects which can be legislated by the state. So we will see. I think that at even if there is a large level central legislative framework which is drawn out for hydrogen, there could be. I don't think the state level incentives or legislations will interfere in many ways. It will be in addition to what is already provided, and it's basically where states would be competing with each other when it comes to incentives, and trying to kind of embrace or give opportunities for hydrogen manufacturers to set up in their state. But yes, there will be some amount of state level legislation, and like in any other industry in India, I mean, while, I think that we touched upon the fact that we should have a legislative and a regulatory framework. While there will be a legislative or a regulatory framework for hydrogen, I think there are 20 other legislative aspects or frameworks which play into this, as simple as any manufacturing unit that you set up in India. There are, factories related legislations, there are employment related legislations, there are tax legislations, there are multitude of other things which play into this. Yes, there's also the mention of the fact that it should be centralized, and if it can be a if there can be a single portal system for clearances, etc., when it comes to hydrogen. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. And to answer your question, yes, there will be some amount of state level legislation too, but we don't believe that that should kind of hinder or create bottlenecks in the overall scheme of things. It did in some instances in solar. I'm not going to go into the specifics over here, but we do have problems when it comes to be it open access or interstate transmission and all of that. There are still bottlenecks we face because of state intervention, but we're hoping that that won't be the case when it comes to hydrogen.
And just to add as an example, what these state level legislative pieces will do, or state level intervention might do, is just like Praveen said, add on to the existing central level benefits, right? You could approach a state level authority for, say, easy access to land for setting up an electrolyzer manufacturing unit, or access to renewable energy at a subsidized rate at the state level from the state government. So it is only going to make it easier. And like Praveen mentioned very clearly, it is going to be a competition within these states to embrace more participants and competitors to enter their state for employment opportunities, revenue, etc. So that's what this dynamic is going to look like according to us.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that those are the questions. Thank you very much. I think that I hope this was helpful. Please reach out to us if you have any further questions. We also have, I think this was also being live streamed. So, I mean, if you want to go back and check on something, I think we are on YouTube as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.